Hello, this is Sandy. Let's talk about writing letters as a way to preserve your family history. And let's take a really good look at a great fountain pen ink to write those letters with. Today, let's look at Tanzanite Sky from Ferris Wheel Press. This ink may be the absolute perfect balance between a dark night sky blue and a deep purple. Let's take a look at the ink journal. On the left side, you'll see three swatches. The one on the top left is a 160 GSM Artist Loft sketch paper. Next to it is the 190 GSM Strathmore sketch paper. The Strathmore paper is very smooth. There's no texture to it. The Artist Loft is a little more bright white, but it has some texture to it. And beneath those is a common index card. You'll see at the top of each card, I've completely saturated the cards to try to get the absolute true color of the ink. And beneath the saturated section, I kind of thinned it out, not with water. I just let the ink kind of naturally dry its way out on each swatch. You can see here, this is a really good ink for shading. At the bottom, you'll see where I did the water test, dropping a few drops of ink and then thinning it out with a water brush. You can see at the top on this one, there's a sheen. It's a reddish, um, I'd almost call it a copperish sheen when you see it in some light, but it's definitely red. It definitely adds more character and shading to the ink. On the Strathmore paper, I think you see, especially in the water test, different layers of the colors that come out. You do see some more of the reds balanced with the blues in the water test. On the index card, especially in the water test, you can see the different colors that make up this ink. If you look over at the right side in my ink journal, you'll see the color test at the bottom of the page where I put several drops of ink, thinned it out with a brush marker, and you can really see the reds and pinks and blues coming out. Now on this page, I typically just use a cotton swab and dab some of the ink near the top. And then I draw a line and try to do layers over the line. You really can't see too many layers here. It's pretty well opaque. It's not very transparent, so you're not seeing the layers. I used, for this ink journal, I began using a Benu Euphoria, the Earl Grey, with a fine nib. So I wrote about half of the page with that pen. And then I used a Lamy Safari, also with a fine nib. And I think you definitely need a fine nib for this ink. It's very dark. It's very wet. I think a medium or broad nib would be absolutely too wet and thick for this ink. Here's the cotton note card. I almost forgot. I use a 100% cotton note card, saturate the top with the ink. I think this definitely gives a different view from the swatch cards. And you can see it's kind of a velvety blue, a velvety purpley blue. And then there's a little square from the cotton note card. Beneath that, bright white paper picks up a little more of the brighter tones, more of the jewel tones in the ink. And then I put the ink in my southwest facing window for 4 weeks and let the sun beat it up. It did pretty well. It held up really well in the UV test. It just faded a bit, turned a little more reddish purple in color. And you can see in the chromatography test beneath it how much of that magenta is part of this ink. And a thin line of gray at the bottom here. Now let's put Tanzanite Sky to work, writing a letter. As historians, genealogists, researchers, It's important that we tell our own stories. It's important that we leave behind something for future generations. Whether it's writing a letter about your favorite films, events that you experienced, your family, or whether it's tracking your own research progress, writing a letter is an important way to document your history. Here's an idea for the subject of a letter you can write today. Are you a geek like me? Are you a nerd? Do you enjoy sci-fi and fantasy? I wrote a letter describing how I got into the sci-fi and fantasy genre through the original Battlestar Galactica television series. From there, I found The Highlander, and then Star Trek The Next Generation and Babylon 5, and it just kept going from there. Today, I proudly wear my geek badge, and I wrote a letter about it. In fact, I wrote two identical letters. I soaked one in cold water for 30 seconds, and then I rinsed the letter. And here is the result. Tanzanite Sky has a little bit of staying power. You can read a few of the words on this letter, although it probably doesn't show up well on the camera. The ink didn't completely dissolve like some other inks we've tested on this channel before. Let's see how Tanzanite Sky holds up against a typical liquid yellow highlighter. I'm using my Lamy Safari with Tanzanite Sky, a fine nib, and my model of the Battlestar Galactica right next to me as a paperweight. We'll write out the alphabet here, and then we'll let it dry for a few seconds, and then we'll test it against a highlighter. This is the model of the original form of the Battlestar Galactica from the original television series. Okay, let's let it dry for a few seconds. Grab that highlighter. Okay, that's probably 15 seconds, maybe 20. Let's give it a go. 25, 30. Okay. Well done, Tanzanite Sky. This ink holds up really well against a highlighter. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you're inspired to write a letter. We often spend so much time researching other people, ancestors, and people we care about, but future generations want to learn about us. Take time to write a letter today. Take care.